Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ftrain Live. And today we'll be recording the rest of Underaf for you guys. So, pretty exciting stuff. Without further ado, Chapter 10 The Battle for Outpost. Bron and Sharon come out the other side of the teleportation spell unscathed. However, Jaggernaut notices them right away, and with a terrible screech, soars directly towards them, claws extended forward. Thankfully, arrows began raining down on the unprepared men, taking out 10 of them right away. Jaggernaut was nearing them now, and Sharon turns to Bron and says, "Bron, grab my hand now." Bron turns a shade of pink and says, "What are you? No time to explain, just do it." Bron obliges her, and as soon as his hand touches hers, a brilliant beam of red and green light intertwines and shoots out of their chests. The beam of light nails a hole directly in Jaggernaut's heart, and he falls to the ground unceremoniously, black blood oozing from the new hole in his chest. Meanwhile, more arrows are raining down on the host of men, and noticing the death of their leader, they quickly lose their resolve to fight anymore and run screaming into the forest. Bron and Sharon embrace for the second time today, both not caring any more what the other would think. Meanwhile, shouts and whoops of joy can be heard coming from the direction of the gate. "Come on, Sharon, let's go back," Bron says, taking her hand and teleporting the two of them back to directly inside Outpost Gate. When they return, Jace, Phil, Vlad, and his men were there to greet them, everyone giving each other exuberant pats on the back. "Sharon, how in the name of the five did you and Bron do that?" Jace asks. Sharon responds, "Not sure, it just felt like the right moment for it to happen." That night, everyone celebrated at the Grandmaster's Hall till the sun came up. Stories were told, songs were sung, and everyone could finally breathe a sigh of relief, as a new age of dragons was beginning to unfold. Poole got the oats that Bron promised to get for him, and all night he sat in the stable, munching away at the bag. According to the Grandmaster, this new era would be called the Baron Age, after the two new dragon tamers, Bron and Sharon, that were now in existence. Bristle and Emeraldo flew in circles all night, and their red and green flames lit up the night sky. All was well in Outpost. For now. The end. And I'll just, skipping ahead to, this is Book 2. Book 2, Dan Vaughn, by Matthew J. Canty. Prelude. Notice the trees for the forest for the trees. Chapter 1, Missing Emeraldo. Several months have passed since the battle between the Resistance and Jaggernaut's host. The king has stopped sending hosts of men out to attack Outpost, and relative normalcy has returned to the base. Bron, Jace, and Grandmaster are enjoying a lively game of Dazzle Elf chess between the former two. "Ha! You're no match for me, Destroyer." Jace moves his elf knight forward, taking Bron's elf bishop. "So you say, Jace, but I doubt you saw this coming." Sorry about that. "So you say, Jace, but I doubt you saw this coming," Bron replies, taking Jace's elf knight with his elf queen. Nearby, Bristle is enjoying a chicken drumstick, trying and eating it all at the same time. "I'll play the winner," Grandmaster says, aptly taking a seat next to the table where the Dazzle Elves board and pieces rest. You'll be playing with me then," Jace says loudly, moving his elf rook forward 5 spaces, putting Bron's elf king into an elf checkmate. "Ah, you got me, Jace. Well played," Bron says concurrently, tipping his elf king over in defeat. Before Grandmaster had a chance to rise from his seat, Sharon burst through the door, frantically saying, "Has anyone seen Emeraldo?" The three exchanged confused glances. No one had seen Emeraldo since yesterday, and their perplexed expression only served to fuel Sharon's paranoia. "Sharon, we have not seen Emeraldo since yesterday. Where did you see him last?" Bron asks. Sharon replies, "Well, we were doing some training outside Outpost Gate." Truth be told, Sharon had been way too trusting with Emeraldo. Dragonlings are notoriously mischievous, and Emeraldo had probably wandered off in search of rats or opossums to snack on. It was not a big deal, but Braun was upset because, as dragon tamers, it was now their job to look after their dragonlings until they grew enough to take care of themselves. Sharon, you really ought to watch Emeraldo more carefully. King Damphon is probably sending scouts out daily to patrol outposts and steal the dragons back for himself. Braun chastised Sharon. I will, Braun. Trust me, King Damphon will not be stealing Emeraldo, Sharon says, looking for some approval from her fellow tamer. Fine, Sharon. We'll look for him together. I'll bring Bristle too, Braun replies. From Bristle, feelings of concern and worry were flooding Braun's mind, enhancing the worry he already felt about the missing Emeraldo situation. Jace and Grandmaster, you both wait here. We will be back with Emeraldo, Braun says, exiting the hall with Sharon and shutting the dragon door behind him. Chapter 2. Emeraldo Found. Sharon and Braun crossed through the common areas surrounding Grandmaster's hall, reaching Outpost Gate. The birds in the surrounding forest could be heard tweeting away on the branches in the trees. Poor Emeraldo. My little baby is probably so scared right now, Sharon says, looking around frantically for Emeraldo to appear in the leaves. Do not fret, Sharon. We will find him, Braun says, walking beside Sharon on the warm path, leaves on the ground surrounding him. They reached the forest clearing, and to their delight there was Emeraldo. The dragon had grown considerably in the months since the last attack. The tips of his wings had extended considerably, and the gold veins were protruding more and more with each passing day. His sage-green scales growing dark. His sage-green scales growing dark like the ground around him. He was chewing and burning the carcass of a coyote he killed, working hard to sever the head from the neck. Emeraldo, thank the five we found you. Emeraldo, thank the five we found you, Sharon exclaims, closing the distance between the two, making sure to keep her distance though, as protective thoughts enter her head from Emeraldo, who is presumably protecting his recent meal. All right, Sharon, let's get Emeraldo back. Braun's sentence is cut off as an arrow nearly goes straight through his head, but instead lands solidly in the tree next to him. Next one goes through your head. A deep, mysterious voice amongst the trees rings out. A deep, mysterious voice amongst the trees rings out into the clearing. Emeraldo goes on guard, with the golden thorns on his back picking up, and his sage-green ears doing the same. Reveal yourself! Reveal yourself now! Sharon yells while raising a protective hand towards Emeraldo. Fine then, the voice says, and from the forest line a tall elf emerges, dressed in blue camouflage. And he had blonde hair the color of the sun. He was quite a sight, and Braun felt a pang of jealousy inside as he noticed Sharon blush the color of berries at the sight of him. State your business here, elf, or we'll have to send you on your way, Braun says, a frustrated look on his face. Oh, nothing much. I just supposed the resistance would be interested in this. He removed from his backpack a dark blue egg with white veins, about the size of a dazzle ball. Braun and Sharon both gasp. Where did you find that? Sharon inquires. I found it by the riverbed one day while out hunting, and have had it with me ever since, the tall elf replies with a shrug, placing the egg back inside the backpack. We need to get back to Outpost now. King Damphon's scouts could ambush us any second, Braun mutters. The trio make their way back to Outpost, passing through the gate, past the market stalls, and when the sun was at its peak in the sky, they arrived at Grandmaster's Hall. The trio entered Grandmaster's Hall, walking in on the sight of the Grandmaster's elf queen, putting Jace's elf king into checkmate. Bah, blast you, Grandmaster, Jace shouts, clearly frustrated by his defeat by the hands of the older man. That's just the way things go sometimes, Jace, Grandmaster says wisely, rising from his chair at the Dazzle Elves chessboard and taking stock of the trio that has entered the room. Now who might our new guest be? Grandmaster asks, a perplexed look on his face. Grandmaster, meet... Sorry, I don't think we got your name. Sharon starts to say, but is cut off. My name is Robert, Robert the elf says, reaching his hand forward to shake the Grandmaster's hand. Pleasure to meet you, Robert, Grandmaster replies, also reaching his hand forward and shaking hands with the new elf. Robert, why don't you show the Grandmaster what you showed us? Braun says, taking a seat next to Jace at the table. With pleasure, Robert replies, hoisting the dark blue with white veins egg out of his backpack, resting it with some difficulty atop the Dazzle Elves board table. By the 5, not another one of the Jay starts to say, but before he can finish, Robert cries out in pain, grasping either side of his head and falling to the floor. Chapter 3. Robert. Our new elf found himself in a dark room. Water filled it up to his ankles, and he was immediately perturbed by this fact. By the 5, now my feet are... Robert is cut off by the sound of a loud roar, and a stream of blue and white flame light up the darkened room, revealing a blue dragon with white veins, spreading like a spider web across his wings. Robert, a voice sounded in the male elf's head, confusing him even further if that was even possible. What do you want? Robert asked in a snotty voice. You, the blue-scaled dragon seemed to reply to him, followed by a rush of frustration and anger flooding into his skull. Fine, if it's me you want so bad, you can have me. Before Robert could finish that sentence, though, his consciousness was pulled from the damp dark room, and he found himself waking up on the floor of Grand Maester's hall. Seems Robert has had a meeting with his dragon egg, Grand Maester says, sagely, sitting back in his chair. What in the name of the 5 was that? Robert says, flabbergasted by the events that just unfolded. Well, your dragon egg just wanted to convene with you, Sharon says matter-of-factly. Oh, well, that makes perfect sense, Robert says with an astonished look on his face. Suddenly, cracks appeared throughout the entire egg, and after a flash of blue light, a blue-scaled dragonling with white veins across his wing, a blue-scaled dragonling with white veins across her wings appeared out of Robert's backpack. Rawr, the blue dragonling awes, turning her scaly blue head from side to side in a motion that reminded Bronn of Robert. Cute one, ain't it, Grand Maester? Bronn says, a flicker of a smile touching his formerly disgruntled face. Beautiful, Grand Maester says, looking at Robert expectantly. What would you like to name her? Grand Maester says. I shall name her Aen, after my dear mother, Robert says, reaching a hand out to the blue dragonling. A blue wave tattoo was already forming on his arm. From Aen, Robert was receiving warm connection thoughts into his head, giving the usually indignant-looking elf, giving the usually indignant-looking elf a friendlier face. Great, now we have another dragon to feed, Jay says in a joking tone. Him and Grandmaster stayed back, while Bronn, Robert, and Sharon made their way out into the courtyard in the back of Grandmaster's hall. Bristle and Emeraldo flew over to investigate their new cousin, giving him curious sniffs, causing the dragonling to sneeze a cloud of blue and white flame. Bristle, Emeraldo, meet Aen, Sharon says, her autumn hair blowing ever slightly in the winter breeze. As far as size went, Emeraldo had the group beat. The male dragon was at least the size of a cow now, followed by Bristle, who was about the size of a large dog. Finally coming in was Aen, who was roughly the size of a small cat. The 3 dragons were now all flying in a circle above the courtyard, their spurts of colored flame creating a beautiful pattern of red, green, and blue. By the 5, Bronn said, his head tilted up to look at the dragon dance. The wonderful dance of dragons came to its end. The 3 came to a rest on the porch attached to Grandmaster's hall, sniffing each other in a comical circle. The new blue dragon, already displaying amazing signs of intelligence for a newborn, sent a spout of blue flame out, lighting all 5 torches aligning Grandmaster's hall porch. The dragons began to settle down, each curling up into a ball in their respective corners on the Grandmaster's porch. Green smoke flowed from Emeraldo's nose as he snored softly. The elves of Alsis need to know that dragons have returned to the land of Underaf, Robert says matter-of-factly, taking a seat on one of the wooden chairs. Well, it sounds like we need to go on a road trip north back home, Sharon replies, also taking a seat next to Robert, much to the dismay of Bronn the Destroyer. The three compatriots agreed to head to the forest kingdom of Elxus in the morning. They even agreed that they should bring Phil along in order to give the lad a glimpse of what, the world looked like outside of Underaf. With that matter being settled, the group turned in early that night, getting a good night's sleep before their journey. Chapter 4: The Road to Elxus. Jace was giving Phil a pep talk before he set out for Elxus, his leather backpack filled to the brim with his longbow, arrows, and various other supplies the group would need along the way, like food and clothing. And if you see Alix the elf, tell her Jace was cut off by Sharon. That'll be enough now, Jace. We don't need you putting any more ideas into the boy's head. Fine, Sharon, Jace says with a half smile, shrugging his sun-emboldened sword and shield onto his back and heading back towards his modest shack next to Phil's. All right, let's hit the road, Robert says, hoisting his tan backpack into the wagon. The wagon was being pulled by none other. The wagon was being pulled by none other. Oh boy, I'm tongue-tied today. The wagon was being pulled by none other than our faithful Pole and Sharon's brown broodmare. Both horses looked ready to go, giving their furry heads several tosses, neighing and stomping the dirt. The four travelers all hopped in the wagon. Bron took the reins, gave them a quick snap and a hya. Then they were off. The wagon pulled by the gray and brown horses made great progress north. They stopped occasionally to get water from the river for their horses and themselves, but other than that, they encountered little trouble, as Robert and Phil were both excellent hunters, taking down small game like rabbits along the way and keeping the group well fed. They took breaks throughout the week-long trip to the Forest Kingdom, setting up camp, which entailed making a fire, Sharon gathered the wood, and cooking the game Robert and Phil managed to take down. Before they knew it, the foursome were noticing the path becoming smaller and smaller, the air temperature dropping a few degrees, and the trees that lined the road becoming taller and thicker around the middle. Well, it won't be far now, Robert said, giving the ropes a quick snap, the horses responding with neighs as they picked up their pace to a canter. I feel like Robert is pushing the horses a little too hard, Bron thought to himself for a moment, a bit irritated with the new elf. The moment passed, though, and he settled back in. Chapter 5: A Train. The group of four was coming up on a beautiful wooden gate, adorned with flowers of blue, red, and yellow. As they passed through the gate, they gave the guardsman working there a tip of 2 goldalags, which he responded with a curt nod, then went back to watching the gate. These days, King Danfon's men were known to come even as far north as Elxus, and elves were known to take no chances, especially when it came to the security of elf kind. The kingdom of Elxus was beautiful, the prize of the world of Underaf. It was the oldest kingdom by far, and the elves were not afraid to let you know this fact. Pole and the brown broodmare trotted peacefully throughout the market stalls, and Phil looked around peacefully too. This city was full of greenery, something he had not known of in Underaf. Outpost in Underaf. As he looked around, he made eye contact with a pretty elven maiden. His face turned a bright shade of red, and he quickly looked away back to the occupants of the wagon. The travelers soon reached their destination, as they were in the capital city of the Elf Kingdom, called Justice. The Capitol building was located directly in the center. It was a magnificent building, almost older than time, and the structure was made of material unavailable to the New World, and it showed. The 2 human beings were blown away at the sight of it. By the 5, Bron says, his eyes widening in astonishment. Your 5 are babes in the eyes of the old gods, Bron, Robert replies, giving the reins another flick, sending the 2 weary horses towards the modest stable next to the Capitol. The group of 4 walked up to the door of the Capitol building. Robert knocked politely, using the wolf-shaped door pommel, and waited politely for the Capitol attendant to come to the door. The large oak door opened a crack, and a nasally voice could be heard. State your business, Bron says. We're tamers, here with our apprentice. And what is it exactly that a tamer does? The nasally voice asked. Well, they tame dragons, sir, Phil pipes up. Well, fine then. The door opens, revealing a well-dressed man, slightly shorter than Robert. They walked into the capital, looking around at the ridiculous wooden dragon, at the amazing, ridiculous wooden dragon statues surrounding the inside of the capital. Excuse me. The polished wooden floors reflected the group of five's reflections perfectly. They approached the throne of the Elf King. He had a long gray beard down to his mid-chest, and a balding head like the Grand Maester. That was where the similarities ended, though, as the elderly elf man was very handsome. Welcome to Justice, capital city of the Kingdom of Elxis. My name is Ftrain, and I am King of the Elves, Ftrain says to the gathered group, his attendant taking his place at his right side. Bronn leads with saying, It's a pleasure to meet you, King Ftrain. I go by Bronn the Destroyer, and we're here to discuss an issue pertaining to Underaf. King Danfon has grown bolder and bolder in his attacks on the resistance movement. Not only that, now we have back at our outpost 3 dragonlings. One is already the size of a cow by now. We're here to inform you of our situation, and humbly ask for the elves' assistance in taking down King Danfon. Once and for all. The words hung in the air for a moment. King Ftrain was shocked by the news of dragons, and his eyebrows raised a few inches on his face. Dragons in Underaf? Astonishing. Bronn, was it? You say the elves need help. You say you need the elves' help, but we're stretched thin as it is. How many elves would be needed? King Ftrain says, taking a seat in his throne once again. Well, not too many, King Ftrain. I would say 5 elves plus Robert and Sharon would be plenty, Bronn says. The king's expression softened to one of understanding. Fine. Kivin, please show our guests to their rooms for the night. Right away, sire, Kivin says, ushering the group of 4 out of the throne room and into the hallway, leading them down to the end where 4 doors awaited them. This is where thou shalt stay while you're here, Kivin says matter-of-factly. I've never had my own room before, Phil says in amazement, rubbing his longbow absent-mindedly, much to the amusement of Sharon, who is used to such royalty. If thou shalt require more assistance, you will find the king and I in the throne room. And without further ado, Kivin made his way back down the hallway, towards the throne room and King Ftrain. Before the group of 4 went to bed that night, the group went to the elf cemetery behind the Capitol building and paid their respects to Robert's father, who had passed away that very same day 14 years ago. The next morning, the group awoke to their stomachs rumbling, so they headed to the incredible Capitol dining room and feasted on fresh caught fish, seared venison, and an assortment of vegetables from the local fields. After breakfast, Phil, Sharon, Robert, and Bronn went back to the throne room to convene with King Ftrain. King Ftrain, honored to see you again today. Your rooms are as elegant as can be, Bronn says respectively. The 2 elves and 2 humans stand around the Elf King's throne, wondering where the Elf King would go next with his train of thought. I've thought on your proposal, and last night I thought on your proposal last night, and I have agreed to include 5 elven archers for your cause, Elf King Ftrain says to the gathered 4. Well, we're most gracious, King Ftrain, Phil replies kindly, already learning a lot of elf culture in his short trip to the elf capital of justice. The Elf King looked around the gathered crew fondly, already feeling some warmth towards them, even though they had only known each other for a short time. Realistically, the crew needed to return to Underaf and outpost soon. Their dragons would be missing them, and they'd never been by themselves for so long. The Grand Maester would be missing them too, and surely had his hands full raising 3 dragons all by himself. Suddenly, 3 male elves and 2 female elves entered the throne room, their longbows strapped to their backs in the traditional fashion of elven culture. They wore emerald green leather and golden necklaces around their necks. You're too kind, father, Sharon piped up at that moment, much to the surprise of her human compatriots, as they had no idea King Ftrain was Sharon's father. "Father?" Bronn exclaims, a shocked look breaking his usual cool demeanor. "Yes, Sharon is my daughter. Sharon is my only daughter, an heir to the entire kingdom of Elxis." So said King Ftrain, with a glimmer of white light in his bright blue eyes. Chapter 6. Outpost. The new group set off that day back to the kingdom of Underaf, feeling better about their chances of defeating King Danfon and his dragon, Grey Winter. They were now accompanied by the five archer elves King Ftrain had assigned for them, and the elves rode beige horses alongside the wagon, pulled by the brown broodmare and pole. Suddenly, a barrage of arrows rained down on the group of 9 from above as they made their way south. The archers were quick to respond, stringing their bows with arrows and scanning the tree line fervently, searching for the source. "King Danfon's men are here! Elves, positions now!" Robert yelled to his peers, the iron-spiked helmets of their enemies gleaming in the sunlight behind the trees. Where they stood behind the trees. Suddenly, spears erupted from the tree line, and a line of 10 Danfunmen erupted from the forest, sprinting at full speed and screaming at the top of their lungs, "For Danfon!" Arrows flew from the elves' bows, cutting through them like a hot knife through butter. 6 remained, and they slowed as they noticed their companions being mowed down. "Bronn," Sharon said, and Bronn knew what she meant. They joined hands, and a beam of red and green light erupted from their chests, mowing the rest of the men down. The 9 breathed a sigh of relief. They were safe, for now, and if they wanted to stay that way, they had to keep moving. Outpost was not too much further down the road south now. On the way, they stopped at an Ersrika church for some quiet reflection on the battle that had been fought. Sharon shed a few tears at the thought of the lost life, and Bronn looked a little shakier than they were used to. Excuse me. After paying their respects, the group of 9 followed the road a bit further down, finally reaching Outpost, and they began settling down once again in the Underaf settlement. Chapter 7. Ain. A few days had passed, and life had returned to normal once again in the settlement of Outpost. The elves sent by King Ftrain were practicing their archery skills in the range behind Grandmaster's Hall. Robert and Ain were practicing Ain's flying skills, while Bronn and Sharon approached from the back door of Grandmaster's Hall. "You're teaching her to fly all wrong, Robert," Bronn teased, tossing the elf a fresh red apple. "Well, then you come and do it, Destroyer," Robert teased back, taking a big bite of the apple and tossing the rest of it up to Ain, the blue-scaled dragon, who snapped the rest of it up in one bite, before letting loose a long stream of blue flame. This was all much to the amusement of the gathered crowd, who whooped and hollered with pleasure. Excuse me. Ain flew through a few more hoops that Robert threw up into the air. Then the whole group, joined by the emissary from Ersrika named Jace, sat down at their lunch table and began to eat a delicious lunch of mixed berries, waterfowl, and fresh wheat bread. After lunch, the group met up to strategize somehow to storm King Danfon's castle, knowing the task would be extraordinarily difficult, and their chances of succeeding at best minimum. "If we lead a small force right through the king's gate," Bronn began saying, using midnight as a pointer, but Sharon cuts him off. "Yes, but what of Grey Winter? You expect a small force of men to hold off the oldest and largest white dragon known to Underaf?" She raises her sword, Crystallis, matching the move Bronn made. The other 5 king elves looked around with a bit of uncertainty, unused to the commotion usually looked down upon in elf culture, especially in regards to a female speaking up to a male. It did not seem to bother Robert, though, and he responded with, "Emeraldo is already the size of a horse, and growing every day. Bristle is right behind him." "That's true, Robert, but Bronn cut Sharon off. "But nothing, Sharon. It's our 3 dragons or nothing at this point, and their size then will have to work. It just has to. He trailed off with a concerned look uglying his face. It shall work, Bronn. Us elves will make sure of it, Robert says, turning to his peers with a steely look in his eyes. Okay, now that that's settled, the elves will lead an attack on the main gate with the help of Emeraldo and Ain, Bronn says, drawing a line in the air with midnight on the map of King Danfon's stronghold. Bronn turned to Jace, his son's sword and shield glimmering with from the light of the torches. Jace, you, Phil, and myself will mount a side assault on the east gate with the help of Bristle, Bronn instructs, already looking the part of a wartime commander, his black sword shining with dark light. Jace responds with, I'm at your command, Destroyer. Good, he replies. And with that out of the way, I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for being at Outpost with us. We shall take King Danfon down on this day, Bronn proclaims to the crowd of cheering elves and men. Chapter 8. The Battle for Underaf. The elves and men were happy with the progress they made for the day, and decided to retire to their beds early that night, dreams of battle filling their heads. The next morning, everyone met up again back in Grand Maester's backyard for one final speech from Bronn before they headed east to Outpost to take down King Danfon once and for all. Men have tried for many years to take down King Danfon in the terrible Great Winter. However, they have always failed. It is up to both men and elves to take this dictator down once and for all. Boisterous cheers erupted from the crowd, and Grand Maester wiped a tear away from his wrinkly face at the sight of his former student's newfound success as commander of the resistance. Follow me to victory. Follow me to the gates of King Danfon, and we shall free Underaf on this day. Bronn the Destroyer yells, the army responding with yells of their own. With the Destroyer's speech coming to its end, the small army of men and elves made their way through Grand Maester's Hall, past the market, and through the gate into the forest, where they began heading east, past the plains, eventually finding King Danfon's castle come into view. When the men and elves gathered, Bronn raised his right hand in the air, made a fist, then pointed right at King Danfon's throne, screaming, For Underaf! And with that, the battle began, and men and elves, fighting together for the first time in 1,000 years, charged Danfon's castle. Arrows began to pepper them, and Jace lifted his son's shield to block as many as he could. As the group continued their charge, arrows began to pepper them, and Jace lifted his son's shield to block as many as he could as the group continued their charge. For naught, though, one of the arrows grazed a One of the arrows grazed a resistance soldier, and he grimaced in pain, but continued on at a slower pace. Bronn, Jace, and Phil broke off from the main assault group. Bristle the Crimson Dragon followed in the sky. More arrows met them, and the tops of Danfon men caps could be seen in the windows of the castle, firing wave after wave of arrows at the break-off group. This distraction, though, gave the remaining elves and men a good opportunity, and they began breaking the gate down with the battering ram they had brought with them. More arrows flew down on the break-off group, attacking the east gate. But that was fine, as at the main gate, the leftover men and elven archers broke through the gates and rushed inside with screams and yells, practically trampling over one another on their way in. As men and elves streamed in King Danfon's castle for the first time since the king seized power 20 years ago, Bronn felt a sense of pride he had not known for a long time. They were not out of the woods yet, though, as now Danfon men and resistance fighters began clashing in Danfon's courtyard. Phil took out 3 Danfon men that peeked their heads out of the windows, but before he could draw another arrow, one shot through the day and right into Phil's belly, forcing the squire to his knees with a loud exhale of breath. Phil! Jace yells out, his son's sword and shield falling to either side of him. Bronn looks on in horror, but has to go on. This can't be all for naught. Doesn't look too good, does it, Jace? A small grimace-like smile touching the boy hero's face. Stop that talk, Phil. We'll get Sharon. She will... Jace starts, but he is interrupted. No, Jace, this is my time. take down King Danfon for the boy hero trails off, his eyes glazing over in a permanent look up at the sky. Tears streamed down Jace's face. He wanted to wipe them away, but he didn't. Instead, they fell into Phil's face. Chapter 9. Grey Winter. Bronn made his way into the castle. Shouts and yells could be heard from the elves and men, fighting for the fate of Underaf outside. Bristle spewed crimson fire from her mouth, and Bronn sent some gratitude thoughts her way, as the red flames lit the torches surrounding the castle entry room. Bronn made it to a pair of pure white doors. A dragon statue that must be of Grey Winter, adorned the top of both doors. Bristle was only slightly larger than just her head. Bronn opens the doors, and the doors made a loud creaking sound that echoed throughout the throne room. At the center of the room, a bone-white throne lay. In it, a beastly man sat, his jet-black beard shining in the red torchlight, and behind him stood the biggest dragon in history. Grey Winter had inky black eyes, and scars covered the dragon's entire body, and ivory thorns lined the dragon's spine going down her tail. The dragon was ginormous, the size of 3 elephants put together at least, and she seemed to know this fact too, as a deadly light shone in her eyes, demonstrating the killer ferocity that lay within her. Well, it seems, though, as another ungrateful citizen has decided to end his life today. King Danfon rose from his throne. His tamer tattoo was a mirage of white bones on his arm, and an ivory sword was at his side. He raised it with a ferocious, inhuman speed. "Your time ends now, Danfon," Bronn replies, accordingly, drawing the black sword midnight in one fluid motion. Bristle flew ahead, spewing crimson fire from her mouth, and roaring loudly with a ferocious look of her own. The 2 men clashed with their black and white swords. Gray sparks flew with each strike, and the men appeared to be at an impasse. Simultaneously, Bristle fought Grey Winter, the smaller dragon, holding her own against the giant one, raking her with her blood-red claws. The 2 big men clashed, destroyer versus king, ruler versus regent, master versus subject. Suddenly, Robert and Sharon burst into the room. "Bronn!" Sharon yells, momentarily taking Bronn's focus away from Danfon, enough for him to slice his arm, the red blood dripping into the floor and becoming a pool on the ground. "Bronn, we're routed. We need to go now," Robert yells, and Bronn breaks away from King Danfon, turning and running back towards his fellow resistance fighters. Bristle comes back too, safely, sending one last burst of fire into Grey Winter's face, causing her to screech in agony. Grey Winter the dragon, that is. The 3 fighters ran back through the entry room and back out into the courtyard, where Jace was waiting for them, his face somber from the event that just took place. "Come on, it's time to go. We lost." The 4 fighters, Jace says, and the 4 fighters hopped on the 3 dragons, now of a size that they could be rideable, and flew back to the outpost. The rest of the fighters returned soon after, and everyone felt the sting of defeat. Chapter 10. The Resistance. It was a rough few weeks following that fateful battle. On one hand, no one had ever gotten so close to defeating Danfon before. On the other, they had lost Phil, and the depressed feelings were only amplified by the connection between tamer and dragon, leaving both parties feeling down and out. Bronn gathers the resistance fighters together, determined to give another speech. "We fought the good fight, men and women," he began, "and although we failed, the resistance has never done as well as we just did," he continued, raising Midnight the sword into the air with conviction. "King Danfon may think he's safe now, but we have the hearts and minds of the Underaf people, and with 3 growing dragons, we shall prevail," Bronn yells, followed by a roar of approval from his audience that traveled up into the mountains of Underaf. In the air, the red, blue, and green dragons flew in a circle, their flames lighting the sky into beautiful colors. The end. Book 3, Asrika. Chapter 1, Taming. Several months have passed since the battle at King Danfon's castle. and everyone has mostly recovered from the sudden and unexpected loss of Phil, and we rejoin our heroes doing some tamer training. Catch me if you can, Braun, Sharon um, yells to Braun from atop Emeraldo, her autumn hair and his green scales glowing in the morning sun. Braun flew after Emeraldo, and Ain, with Robert atop her, was not far behind. The three colorful dragons flew through the morning air. Life was beginning to look up again, and since the death of Phil, life had been very difficult. The three dragons landed in Grand Maester's courtyard. Their tamers hopped off and settled down to have a nice breakfast of coffee, oatmeal, and fresh berries. The berries had been gathered from the surrounding forest. Braun, what is your favorite food in human culture? Robert ponders, eating a bite of oatmeal. For me, it would have to be oatmeal, Braun replies, much to the surprise of Robert, who had a bite of oatmeal in his mouth already. The trio concluded breakfast and returned to their training. This time, Sharon practiced with bow and arrow, while Robert and Braun engaged in some friendly sparring. Overall, the morning went pretty well. Sorry about that. Continuing. Overall, the morning went pretty well. And the group returned to Jason Grandmaster for a check-in. How are my favorite students doing on this fine morning? Grandmaster inquires, currently in the middle of a Dazzle Elves game with Jace, who is losing to the Grandmaster. The group of five sat down for another strategy meeting in regards to how to defeat King Danfon. The information gathered from their first attack on the castle was invaluable, and they were trying to put it to good use. By the old gods, I'd say if we strike from the west, with all three dragons, King Danfon would be dead before he could say Dazzle Elves chess, Robert retorts, a quizzical look showing on the other four members' faces. Yes, Robert, but... Robert cuts him off. But nothing, Braun. If we have any chance of defeating King Danfon once and for all and restoring peace to Underaf, we need to launch a full western assault. The group of five talked a bit more into the afternoon. Everyone got a chance to speak their mind on the issue, and they came to the consensus that Robert's plan was best. 1 week from today, they would launch a complete attack from the west, with the hope that they would totally catch King Danfon off guard, routing his forces, and making Danfon face them by himself. It was easier said than done, though, and the group of four decided to take a break for the afternoon, reconvening when the sun sat heavy in the sky. So we are going with Robert's plan. However, how big do our dragons need to be to defeat Grey Winter? Sharon inquired, curious as to the answer. Well, Grey Winter is about the size of 3 elephants, so I would say our dragons need to be at least the size of an elephant apiece, Robert answered stoically, leaning back in his oak chair slightly. The group of four finished their discussion quietly. Ain, Bristle, and Emeraldo fought playfully in the courtyard, much to the amusement of the Grandmaster. The group of four decided to call it for the day, and all went back to their abodes and outposts. Braun spent the rest of the day studying war books. Sharon read poetry about dragons, and Robert studied an archery book. The Grandmaster read a book on the history of Dazzle Elves chess, his favorite game to play with his young pupils. Chapter 2. The Road to Esrika. The next day, Jace gathered Braun, Sharon, and Robert to his abode to discuss something. The three all wondered what it could be Jace wanted to propose. Thank you all for coming today, Jace says as he enters his abode, where the three tamers were waiting patiently. No problem, Jace. Now what seems to be the issue? Sharon inquired, fidgeting with her sword, Crystallis, that was tied to her belt. Well, remember how you all visited Elxis to gain support for our cause? Well, I propose we do the same thing, except this time we go south to Esrika. The proposal hung in the air for a moment, as the three tamers pondered the implication of what Jace was saying. None of them had ever been to Esrika before. Robert and Sharon were from Elxis, and Braun Underaf, so the prospect of this new, exciting land scared them just a little bit. All right, Jace, guess it is time for another road trip, Robert responds, also leaping to his feet in an elegant motion only an elf could perform. They waited for dawn the next day, and they set out in a wagon, pulled by none other than Pole, and a brown broodmare that belonged to Sharon. The journey south was pleasant. Like their first trip to Elxus, Robert caught game for the group, and Sharon gathered firewood for the night campfires. Braun had developed into an excellent cook, and made amazing soups from the herbs collected along the way, and game that Robert caught. They ran into a bit of trouble on their third day of travel, and Jace had to fight off a mountain lion that attacked their camp. He was able to repel it without repercussion, and the group set out again the morning of their fourth day of travel. On the fourth day of traveling south, they began to notice the changing environment. Greenery became sparser until it was practically non-existent, and the air turned from Underaf temperate to a dry desert-like heat known only in the southern kingdom of Esrika. The group passed cheetahs hunting antelopes, crocodiles cooling themselves in the water, and hippos fighting in the river. Finally, they reached the capital city of Esrika, Jupitus, and the group entered through the north gate. Chapter 3. Jupitus. As the group led by Jace entered the capital city of Esrika, they noticed many merchants and stall owners selling their products to customers walking alongside them. In the sky, a pelican could be seen flying west, and an Esrikan hawk flew slightly below it, heading the same way. This way, I will show you to our capital building, Jace says, leading the wagon filled with man and elves to the majestic temple in the middle of the settlement. As they entered, 2 guards bearing a sun's sword and shield gave Jace a respectful nod before they carried their way into the throne room. Inside sat an extraordinarily old woman with hundreds of beads around her neck. Her first words were, "Ah, my baby Jace has returned to me." Jace responded, "Lovely to see you again, mother." Robert asked the question on the group's mind. "Your mother led the country while you were away?" In elf culture, women leading was unusual. Still, the question came off as slightly rude. "Yes, Robert, women in Esrika are equal, if not more powerful than men." Jace replies courteously, "Well, what brings 2 elves and an Underaf man to our hall?" Pelea asks, the beads on her neck rustling ever so. Before telling her, Jace set down a small gift of lavender flowers, as was customary upon entering a Jupitus building. The rest of the meeting went well. Pelea agreed to send 5 Esrikan Sun Spear people with the crew back to Underaf, and the Underafians informed Queen Pelea of the return of dragons and tamers, much to her delight. Chapter 4. Violet. On the way back north, our heroes encounter something incredible. "I cannot wait to get back to Outpost and challenge Grand Maester to a game of Dazzle Elf chess," Braun says while holding the reins to pull. Suddenly, in the distance, our heroes notice something purple, and upon closer inspection, they're all amazed to discover a 4th dragon egg. This one was purple with brown veins. "Oh my 5, Jace. Now you can become a tamer just like us," Sharon yells, extraordinarily happy for her friend. "I guess I can," Jace says, rubbing the purple and brown egg absentmindedly. Suddenly, a flash of purple light, and Jace's consciousness is hurtling through a purple and brown kaleidoscope of light and color. When he comes to, he is in an Esrikan room with purple decorations everywhere. In the center, a middling purple with brown veins dragon stands regally. "Jace," a voice sounds in his head, and he realizes it is coming from the dragon. Also entering his mind are feelings of warmth and love that came from the purple dragon. Suddenly, he is pulled back through the kaleidoscope and into the real world. Jace, talk to us about what just happened. Bronn inquires. The dragon spoke to me. As Jace says this, cracks appear in the egg, followed by a flash of purple light. In its wake, leaving a beautiful purple with brown veins and horns dragon, who mawed softly to herself. Another dragon and tamer enter the world of Underaf, Robert says. A tattoo with purple lavender flowers already beginning to appear on Jace's left forearm. Shall name her Violet, after my late grandmother. The purple and brown dragon seemed to like that, spurting a small purple flame from her mouth. The crew of heroes, plus a dragon now, continue north, and the landscape began to change. Once again, turning to the tempered forest Bronn was so familiar with. When they made it back to Outpost, the heroes went their separate ways for the night. Jace, the new tamer, settling in for some quality time with his new dragon Violet. The next day, the 4 dragon tamers met up in Grandmaster's courtyard to discuss strategy on the next attack on King Danfon's castle. Now that we have 4 dragons and 5 Asrican Sun Spearmen, let's change our strategy to 4 separate forces, each headed by a different tamer, Bronn suggests, gesturing with his sword midnight on the map of King Danfon's castle. I'm on board with the change, says Robert, fiddling with the longbow on his back, a practice that seemed common among elves. I say Emeraldo and I attack from the north, Jason, Violet from the south, and finally Bronn and Robert's forces will attack from the east and west, respectively, Sharon proclaims, kind of out of character for her, as she was normally quiet and kept to herself. Sounds like a plan, Sharon. We'll attack 1 week from now, when Violet has some time to grow and bond with her new tamer Jace. Bronn says, as Violet curls up on Jace's lap, comfortably blowing small spurts of purple flame. The next week, everyone gathered for the final assault on King Danfon's castle. This was all or nothing. If they did not take out King Danfon here, Underaf was doomed. The 4 dragon tamers all hopped on their dragons and took to the air, leading their respective armies east towards the fortress. Reaching the fortress, our arrows were shot swiftly towards the red, blue, green, and purple dragons. All 4 were able to dodge and weave through the arrows. Jace did take a bolt off his helmet. Jace, Robert, Sharon, to me, Bronn yells, flying Bristle his crimson dragon down towards the throne room window. Below, the men, elves, and sun spearmen fighting an intense battle at the king's main gate. Grandmaster fought hard with lightning spells, taking out his fair share of soldiers, before having to retreat to avoid being completely overwhelmed. Bronn and Bristle break through the king's throne room. Inside was Danfon and Grey Winter, both glaring menacingly underneath the orange torchlight. For Phil! The 4 tamers yell in unison and charge the king, who had his white sword looking deadly in his hands. Okay, sorry, back. For Phil, the 4 tamers yell in unison and charge the king, his white sword looking deadly in his hands. A rainbow color of swords slice at the king's white sword, and he parries them all. Sharon was the only one who managed to make a cut with her sword Crystallis. Above them, the 5 dragons fought in an intense sky battle, Grey Winter spewing a ton of white flames from her mouth. Bristle, Emeraldo, Ain, and Violet all fought bravely, but it was a stalemate, because Grey Winter was just that powerful. Finally, Bronn the Destroyer, with all the strength of the resistance behind him, stabs King Danfon through the heart. The king goes, falls to his knees, and goes deathly still. The group of 4 could not believe their eyes. Above them, Grey Winter let out a wail of pure agony as her tamer connection was severed, eventually too falling to the ground and laying unnaturally still, her black eyes open in a permanent glare of death. The group of 4 rejoined the Grand Maester and the gathered army. They told them the good news. King Danfon and Grey Winter were dead. Cheers erupted from the resistance, and that night everyone feasted on roasted ham, fresh picked vegetables, and salty, delicious fish. In the sky above, our 4 favorite dragons flew in a circle around each other, blowing red, blue, green, and purple flames as they fly. The end. Alright, thank you guys Thank you guys so much for watching. Um, yeah, this book was a lot of fun to write and to narrate for you guys. And yeah, look forward to Space Squares coming to a YouTube video near you.